Lophi Learns to Fly, a dinosaur tale by David Eugene Ray.
Lophi was the smallest dinosaur in his herd. Not the youngest, but the smallest. The other dinosaurs wouldn't play with him because they said he was too small or too young. So Lophi spent a lot of time alone. But that was okay, because he liked watching the sky. He watched the skies because he loved to watch the pterodactyls making lazy circles in the powder blue heavens. Sometimes it was hard to watch them because the sun would be so bright he would have to squish his eyes tightly to keep out the blinding rays. He also loved watching the little things that flew around closer to the ground that were so tiny he was almost afraid to breathe on them, thinking he might hurt them. They seemed to be at the mercy of the wind, but they weren't. He knew this because sometimes they would land on his nose. Then they would flap their wings and fly away, gone. Lophi loved his home. He was just lonely. And sometimes he wished he could grow wings and just fly away too. Today he was particularly lonely, so he went for a walk to see if he could find anything fun to do. He really meant to do something new, but as always, he had his head up and his eyes fixed on the skies, looking for something with wings. Lophi knew from experience that walking with your eyes focused on the sky isn't the smartest thing to do. The sky was just so big and beautiful, and it was so easy to get lost in thought, and bang! Lophi ran into something so hard that he was knocked backwards right onto his bottom. Blinking his eyes, trying to clear his head, he looked to see what he had run into, and to his surprise, it was another dinosaur named Weena. It looked like she was hurt, so he jumped up and went to help her. Then he realized she was laughing. Finally, she caught her breath and, still laughing, said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so clumsy. But you should have seen the look on your face when you fell on your bottom. It was hilarious." Lophi didn't know what to do. He didn't know her very well and never really spent a lot of time talking to a girl, or anyone for that matter. He couldn't believe how nervous he was. But before he could decide what to say, she sat back and said, "I'm Weena, and I'm sorry I ran into you, but I was busy looking at those pterodactyls flying across the sky." "Was that what you were looking at too?" Stunned, he just nodded. "I love watching them fly," she said, as her eyes shot a peek into the sky. "They just seem so free and happy up there. Not like..." She stopped talking for a second, and her head bowed down a bit. "I know it sounds funny, but I'd love to have a pair of wings so that I could fly too." Lophi smiled at this thought, and Weena smiled too. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" she said. Lophi wondered if she was hungry too, but before he could ask if she was thinking about a sandwich, she blurted out, "Let's make our own wings." That sounded just as good as a sandwich, so Lophi nodded his head. Weena smiled a big, toothy grin. Lophi and Weena went to the bamboo forest beside the lake and cut down enough stalks to make a frame. This took them almost the entire day, since they had to choose the strongest shoots to cut, but the strongest bamboo was also the hardest to cut. But once that was done, they were tired of working and decided to play some. So they played in one of the smaller ponds, where they swam together for hours, playing water games and splashing so much water they began to worry that they would empty the pool. They told each other all the jokes and stories they knew, and even began making up new ones. Well, actually, it was Weena who did most of the talking, as she seemed to talk as much as she breathed. But Lophi didn't mind. The next day, they hunted for material to cover the wings, something that would catch the wind. So they walked for almost an hour to the banana tree forest, where they chose only the finest banana leaves, the ones with no holes or tears. Then they carried them back all the way to the tall green grass and laid them beside their wings. Once there, they realized they didn't know how they would secure the leaves to the frame. They came up with lots of ideas, but none of them seemed like they would really work. By now, it was almost time to go home and eat, so they agreed to meet first thing in the morning to start work again. When Lophi arrived at the wings, a smiling Weena was already there. "I know how to glue them together," she said. "Last night we had honey with our dinner and it was so sticky. Well, my little brother, he's so messy, he nearly got stuck to the floor. I'm sure it'll work." So they used honey to paste banana leaves to the bamboo frames. It took them all morning because the honey was so sticky and messy, it was hard to get everything right. But eventually they finished, and then all they had to do now was wait until the honey dried so they could test their wings. Later that afternoon, they sat on a hill over the tall green grasses, watching them sway in the warm breeze. It looked like the grass was dancing to the sound of the wind, so the two new friends decided to dance along with them until they were laughing so hard they could hardly stand up. They talked some more about what they would do when they were up in the sky. When they met in the morning, the wings were covered with dew and a few bugs, but the honey seemed to be dry. Weena was so excited she wanted to put them right on and start flying, but Lophi was worried. Lophi wanted to fly, but he didn't want to leave his family, and he didn't want to leave his beautiful home, especially now that he had a friend. He saw the way Weena looked at the wings, and he was worried that once she got into the air, she would sail away and leave Lophi all by himself again. "Maybe we should test them out first, or maybe I should test them out first, to make sure they're safe," Lophi said. Weena thought this was a good idea and set about fastening Lophi's wings onto his back. She was so excited she kept chattering about what he should do and what he should not do when he's up in the air. "Don't fly too high at first. You might lose sight of us and get lost," she said. "And don't fly too low or you'll crash into the trees." As Weena kept tightening straps and talking, Lophi started to wonder if this was really a good idea. But then all he had to do was look up and see those pterodactyls to know it was the right thing to do. So he walked out to the edge of the little cliff, took in a quick breath and looked down and smiled at his reflection. Then he looked up, then over at Weena, who was so excited she was bouncing a little, and then jumped with all his might. He was flying! He was free! He was majestic! He was falling? He fell like a stone and landed in the shallow water of the once peaceful pond, where his wings shattered into a dozen pieces, and he got stuck in the muddy bottom. It turns out that honey doesn't really ever dry. He was shocked, but he wasn't hurt. He heard a giant splash and looked up to see Weena wading through the water. "Are you okay? Please tell me you're okay." "I'm okay," he said, "but I think my wings are now fins." They both sat there in the water in total silence, looking at each other with a million questions in their eyes. Then they both broke into hysterical laughter. Still laughing, Weena helped pull Lophi out of the mud, which was harder than you'd imagine, which only made them laugh harder. Finally, they made it to the shore, where they laid back, still giggling a bit, and stared into the bright blue sky, where they silently watched the pterodactyls flying. "You know," Weena said, "maybe flying isn't such a good idea anyway." Lophi nodded his head in agreement. "And I'm beginning to like it here a lot better anyway," she added. Again, he just nodded. There's no telling how long they sat there silently watching the sky, but the silence was eventually broken when Weena, with a piece of grass in her mouth and still looking at the sky, said, "Knock, knock."
You are listening to Confetti Park, a podcast brought to you by ConfettiPark.com.